Hello everybody, I'm Phoenix Ferry. I am the MSc course leader at the Creative Computing Institute at the University of Arts London, and I'm here today to talk to you not about our MSc program, which is amazing and outstanding, and if you want to learn creative coding, please come study with me. It is a great program. I'm so proud of it, and if you're interested, you can find me at the CCI. Feel free to reach out through the website or our Twitter. But I'm here today to talk about my creative practice, and I'm going to frame my work in the context of my ability, which I was diagnosed with a disability. Originally, it started in like 99. I got diagnosed with like 9 different problems. And eventually a doctor looked at me and put a systemic diagnosis together. And I've kind of had to negotiate technology very differently than other people because my body is not going to work with most interfaces. I managed to make it work by doing all kinds of interesting things like moving around a lot, changing input devices. But overall, this whole kind of technosphere has failed me as a user, and it has failed me in ways that have cost me in my right arm. I think it was 20% of my nerve endings. It took 5 years of my life away. I'm pretty, when it comes to thinking about these things, I'm pretty dead set on providing solutions and alternatives to allow people like me to control computer systems in any way that they think should work for them and how they want to create and be. Why should some massive corporation like Apple tell me how I should use my technology? I'm just not down with that. So this is a little bit about my research and my research into games specifically and game controllers. I build large, beautiful, playable worlds and tiny little playable interfaces. And basically I started building interfaces so I could go back to playing games because when the console controller came out, I couldn't hold the thing. I tried. I bought one. I picked it up. I tried to play Splinter Cell. I was so excited. And within 5 minutes, my hands were just numb and I couldn't feel my fingers. And I was like, well, that was a lot of money. So I had to really think about how I could make interfaces that would let me keep making and playing games with people who would be interested in playing with me or who also had abilities that were maybe outside or divergent from what surveillance capitalism deemed our interfaces should look like. All right, with no further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about my PhD research into this territory. All right, so great. Let's see. Spacebar. Whoops. Okay, so I'm going to mention a tool that I've made at CCI with Rebecca Febrink called InteractML. I'll introduce it about halfway through the talk. But it's a node-based Unity asset empowering developers to make games and gestures. Let's see if I can do this properly. Here we go. Oh, the entire time my slides didn't have my name up. Well, Phoenix Ferry, at Phoenix Ferry on Twitter. You can find me. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about InteractML. And it is a node-based Unity asset empowering developers to make gesture-based physical interactions with video games. And so lots to unpack, and I hope that the intro I gave you about the work I do kind of tips you off that I think people should be able to make their own interfaces and developers should empower that. So this is a tool which does that. All right, so now we're going to move on. In this talk, I'm going to give a brief overview of post-cognitivism, which is a really fancy way of saying Western science has failed us. Perhaps maybe Cartesian dualism isn't the only way of thinking and being in the world, and maybe embodied computing and intersectional feminism might have something to offer. I'm going to position the current mental models at play in game controller design, and I mean that with the traditional corporate stuff that gets made. And then I'm going to look at the alternative community that I've helped build called the Alt Control Games community. And I hope you'll be able to see some of the really cool emergent opportunities there. And you'll be able to frame them as advances in user experience design. Then I'm going to do a quick overview of the target audience and the goals that InteractML has, and introduce InteractML, and introduce InteractML. I'm not going to do a live demo today because doing a live demo this way would be extremely difficult. But if you want to see a live demo of InteractML, I wanted to put it out there that you can book me at calendly.com/PhoenixPerry, and I will absolutely give you a live demo anytime you're interested. I have office hours that are open Thursday and Saturday to general creators, so feel free to find me there. Cool. So to really understand video game controllers, we need post-cognitivism. I really never thought I'd say that, but that's what doing a PhD does. So I'm really interested in embodied computing and in embodied cognition. So it turns out that a lot of the ways that we actually make sense of the world are not in our mind. And this is really counter to how Western thought has told us the mind works, right? Especially when we talk about AI, you just imagine this like disembodied brain floating outside of the body in a vat somewhere, super intelligence, right? Well, turns out that's not actually how intelligence works at all. And one of the biggest failures of early artificial intelligence was assuming that kind of position. Turns out that the body actually has a lot of cognition in it. And our bodies do a lot of information processing before that before that information even reaches our mind, before that sensation or, experience even becomes conscious. So a really good example are frogs. So frogs in their retina have these cells that are predisposed to see like dark objects that move in their field. And basically what that's for, so when like flies and stuff come in, their brain can like really quickly grab them. That's why frags, lol, fraggles, I would love that. Why frogs can actually grab flies with their tongue so fast, because they don't ever think about it. That cognition never even reaches their higher level states of like cognitive being. It's all happening in the eyeball itself, which is really cool. So their sensing of the fly is their knowing of the fly's existence, which is pretty profound. This kind of way of thinking works with humans too. Turns out we do a lot of cognition processing in our guts, which I found a recent study on this that I thought was really fascinating. And our bodies hold a lot of the same kind of knowledge. Fear is a really good example. If we think we're being threatened, we have a lot of responses that occur before our cognition even becomes aware of it. And we found this out like late 1800s. So this way of thinking is informed by phenomenology, and phenomenology is a kind of philosophy that really contested mind-body dualism. It said, hey, maybe the mind is not so separate from the world. And it thinks of perception as being intelligence. In embodied cognition, knowing is dynamic and subject to changes in the environment. It's not something that you just it's not declarative knowledge. It's not something you just hold on to because you read in a book. You learn by being in the world. You learn by your senses understanding the world. Cognition extends throughout the body, and it's not limited to the mind. And this is some work done by Lakoff and Johnson in 1999. Enactive cognition is kind of a development of embodied computing, and then let's see if I can remember this. Radical embodied cognition is another thing that has came out. It was right when I finished my master's, but it's like a further take on that even. So enactive cognition really, it borrows a lot from Buddhism, which they've revised the first edition of their book, Varla, Thompson, and Roche, to really recognize the contribution of Buddhism in a way that I think is more appropriate. But it emphasizes the iterative, temporally extended, and dynamic quality of embodied and situated cognition. So that's a whole lot of fancy words saying it really emphasizes the embodied experience and how it's dynamic and it's situated in our cognition. There's a tight integration between the person and their environment. This is called structural coupling in this theory. It's not possible to separate sensing and perceiving in the sensory motor loop. Our sensing and perceiving are the same thing. They're connected. And like I said, Varla borrowed the Buddhist phrase, laying down the path in walking, to capture the quality of the enactive approach. And if you've ever meditated or you've ever spent time in a Buddhist monastery, you'll know that you can't just tell somebody about the experiences you have when you're meditating. They are procedural knowledge. They're gained through practice. Distributed cognition kind of takes this a step further, and it looks at how there's some amazing books on it. Cognition in the Wild is one if you're interested in digging a bit deeper. But it turns out our cognition is super distributed through our tools and our environment. Sailors on a ship do this in amazing ways. Their cognition is split throughout the ship and the different crewmates. But pragmatic action is action that changes the world. So let's be basic and go over some of the basic things. And epistemic action, which I really care about here, is action that changes the nature of our mental tasks. This is going to come up again in the next frame in like how game controllers work in our minds. So been building up to how we think when we use game controllers. So a really good example of this is pen and paper. If you do long division, we actually, or long multiplication, we offload some of the cognition to like the paper, right? To the page. And if you ask someone to do long division without writing that stuff down, it is so much harder. But if you give them a pen and paper, they can, do it the way that you learned in school. And that process is actually part of the cognitive process. And Chris and Maglio have this amazing paper on distinguishing epistemic from pragmatic action. It came out in 1994. And I adore it. And the reason I adore it is it uses video games to validate the theories it presents. So they did a scientific study with Tetris. And what they did is they gave one group of people Tetris where you could rotate the pieces with a controller, just like Tetris that you played your whole life. And the other group of people, they took the ability to rotate the pieces away from them. And guess what? The people who didn't have the ability to rotate the pieces could barely solve the puzzle. So it turned out the ability the controller gave people to rotate the pieces was part of the cognitive process of playing Tetris and part of its success. So I think that that's like a pretty clear indicator that epistemic action might have a huge impact in user experience design, and that some of the cognition that we're kind of using when we work with these interfaces is actually happening on the device itself, on the object you're interacting with. The controller and its affordances in the user experience design alter players' cognitive processes during gameplay. They alter them. They're not just some sort of brain doing, problem solving, using tool. It is actually just this integrated approach. And material engagement theory takes this a step further. If you're looking for something to take this and understand how it applies to human history and anthropology. So controllers are more than tools that let us play games. They're part of the sensory experience shaping players' very cognition. So here's some of the control schemes that we're using right now in games controllers. So abstract controllers. I've kind of named them that because they don't really have a name. I thought they were called abstract controllers. Turns out I made it up. Just totally made that up. Can't find it anywhere. But I like this term abstract because they're not actually connected to anything. You have to learn them. So WASD on a keyboard, if you've ever played a computer game, WASD, W, S, and A, and D are up and down and left and right. But you wouldn't know that unless someone told you, and you have to learn it, right? Some other examples of abstract controllers are knobs. You don't know what that knob does until you see how the game reacts, and you have to kind of form a mapping between how you understand the knob is moving and what it's doing in the game. Joysticks are very similar, and buttons. One of the things that I think is really interesting that I've noticed in my research is that joysticks, or the D-pad or the console controllers, actually takes Cartesian mapping practices and applies it to the controller with the adoption of basically a compass rose right on the device itself. So it infers this out of body, top down approach to spatial awareness, which is something I'm looking into presently. So in studies, abstract controllers actually do a better job and outperform embodied controllers on certain tasks largely shooting games and other games which have been specifically evolved alongside the history of abstract controller and console controller development, which tells me something really powerful is going on in how the coupling between the game and the controller is occurring. So this design pattern originally shows up in 1958 with our friendly handy dandy joystick. So natural controllers, these are controllers that borrow from our proprioception of lived experience in the world. So they just take that mapping we know, like from riding a bike or driving a car, and slap it directly on the interface. Grand Track is the first video game to ever do this. Atari just literally took a car gas pedal and a car steering wheel and a shift, slapped it on an arcade controller, and people knew how to drive the car because they knew how to, or to drive the in-game car because they knew how to drive a car, right? So it's like A to B. And really a lot of other things that you've seen in games do this. Guitar Hero, shape of a guitar. Light guns, bam, bam, bam. Duck Hunt, drum pads. All these things come from direct natural mappings. And natural controllers are something that is they're fairly well documented and established in user experience design. And they are very easy to understand. They require almost no onboarding if a person has that cultural awareness. So they're still tied to the cultural awareness of whoever is situated in whatever culture. You still have to unpack that. But if it's somebody from the exact same kind of Western culture that you're from, or, not, kind of pointing to a discrepancy here in the term natural, and I hope you're picking up on that. But basically, these were created in 1972 and 1970. Yeah, that's right. Jeez, seems so old. 1972 to 1974, depending on whether or not you count for the first one which Atari made, which shall remain nameless, but I will hint at it is the first maze game. The interface is unspeakably sexist. So we're moving on. So embodied controllers. These are controllers that use the body. And again, Atari really innovated on this. Atari they blow my mind when you go and look at all the crazy user experience innovation that was happening at Atari early on. This was a mind controller, and they were describing it. You can't really read it very well. You kind of read it on my slides. I apologize for that. But they were advertising in some of their designs as like ways that disabled players could play. And it uses basic muscle tracking across the head. Very few of these ever went into production, but other systems have gone on to kind of pioneer in the same space. The Muse is a headset that's very similar, actually way more advanced, but it's picking up on a similar design and a similar kind of call to action that the brain should be able to control the interface. You also see it in Star Wars, which is something I picked up recently when I rewatched Star Wars. There's a brain control device in the reboot of Star Wars. You see it with the Kinect, the Wiimote, the PS Move, the Oculus Rift, and the HTC Vive. All of these game systems have embodied controllers. So these controllers are not physically diegetic. And what I mean by that is none of the game's story or game's narrative content is getting played out on the controller. The plastic itself is super ambiguous. You can play any game with them. They are just sort of, generic. So this was the original one, 1989. And this kind of stuff is really tied to the hardware industry. And there is a lot of cantankerous hacking going on because these capitalistic companies lock this hardware down and people like me just don't have access to it. So I was a big part of the Open Kinect community to try and bring hacking and machine learning to the Kinect really early on because I needed that interface, and Microsoft, thankfully left a bug that they now say is intentional after it got hacked, inside and out. But also Sony's really bad for closing stuff up, and people have to the Move, literally someone did their master's degree to reverse engineer. So embodied controllers are not going away, and we really need better interaction design with them. Like the interaction design for embodied controllers is so pretty poor. The Vive has the best I've seen Some of the Vive embodied controls are actually getting pretty intuitive. Rec Room has a really nice watch and backpack interface, so they're using metaphors in the game, and that's a pretty advanced step in the right direction. But we need more of that kind of stuff when VR designers are thinking about how to build these embodied experiences in VR space. So I think HCI has a whole host of what I like to call hot probs. And many of them, in my opinion, stem from like the history of war and surveillance capitalism, which runs parallel to the history of HCI design. And a lot of times what gets invented gets kind of pushed forward by like military-industrial complex, by the military-industrial complex and the aims they have for producing interfaces for, joystick, literally flying warplanes. And other things like radar and positioning, like flying drones. A lot of things are getting like really pioneered within like military industrial complex situations that I find really uncomfortable. Video games has a long history of working with the US military to produce basically propaganda. And human-centered design often makes assumptions about mass consumption. And that's another big problem I have with it, other than the fact that it's really tightly coupled to the history of war. It is very tightly coupled to the history of large-scale sales. Not scales, on a scale that like I could use or somebody else who might have a problem could use, but like thousands and thousands, millions and millions of users. So that is a goal. That's a goal of selling units. Universal design needs to go, in my opinion. And I'm going to say universal design did a lot of things right, but has become synonymous with user experience design over the last several years. And I think it's lost a lot of its way. So it was originally thought of as a way to kind of change the architectural built environment to be accessible for the largest number of people. And before we completely get rid of user experience design, I'm just going to say it hasn't even been implemented in large parts of the UK. Like huge parts of the UK are still completely inaccessible to people in wheelchairs or people who need any sort of assistive walking devices that just nobody can get up these tiny staircases and stuff. So basically, the big problem of universal design, the biggest one, is that it assumes that one design, can ever work for all disabilities. And that's just really not the case. Like, disability is not just like a one and done kind of situation. Disabilities are huge. They run the gamut. They can include physical disabilities, mental disabilities, cognitive disabilities, and dropping a curb, while fantastic and really needed, is not the end of things. Like, we need to actually really rethink what access means in a design space. So I'm really interested in looking at game controllers as in a way to explore kind of intersectional feminist practices, handcrafting, and crypt technoscience, as is proposed by Amy Hammery. They're amazing, and I really love their papers. I've been reading the crypt technoscience manifestos recently, and they have been fantastic. And what they're proposing is that disability is not something that should be engineered out of culture. It should not be optimized away, but rather we should think about how to integrate what it brings to culture in new and valued ways. Design justice is another approach that is worth looking at. It rose out of this like an intersectional feminist approach that takes a lot from Crenshaw's work, Kimberly Crenshaw's stuff, and it really looks at how you would think about design in terms of the matrix of domination, which is a system of looking at different impacts of like intersectional overlaying social issues on top of each other. So for example, like if you happen to be poor, you happen to be, non-Western, or, from a culture that doesn't embrace like Western design principles, or you happen to be disabled, or like, it's like all these different things are going to hit. Like race is a huge one. It's going to like Black women and white women are going to experience the world radically differently because of all of these different intersectional problems that are not just tied to one thing, right? They're tied to like multiple layers of culture. So that's what design justice really kind of says. It really wants people to look at the intersectional way of thinking about design that really takes a much broader lens. And I think that design justice, there are a lot of things about the Allied Media Conference work on design justice that are very connected to my own practice and were, arising organically within my practice around the same time this theory was evolving. And my guess is that I am not alone. And a lot of women have been using, and, a lot of people in general have been using ways to think about craft and making and the kind of craft maker culture that has been unfolding as an opportunity to really rethink how design gets shaped. So alt control games have been answering this call, in my opinion, in the video game space. So what is alt control? So originally I started a game jam with Chris Murio at NYU in 2012. And I started this game jam with Chris because both he and I were really interested in looking at ways that embodied computing could work in video games. We weren't happy with the solutions we were seeing, and we thought it would be really great to get a bunch of students together to hack on experiences, and some amazing distributed interfaces got produced. It was sponsored by Adafruit and Make Magazine, and the first judges were Catherine Isbister and Kaho Abe, and it ran in 2013. Some Russian games designers reached out to me and Chris, and they asked if they could throw one and take the name, and we said, sure, why not? They did another one in 2014, 2015, another one in 2017. They've been running them quite regularly, which is fantastic. Within months, the name had spread to the Copenhagen kind of games creators after the Russian game jam, and they ended up doing alt control game jams there. And GDC brought it into the exhibition hall in 2014 when they incorporated it into the IGF as an award category in 27. Sorry, I said that a little bit weird. GDC did an alt control exhibition in 2014 in the main exhibition hall. And the Game Developers Conference, if you've never been, is one of the largest, most important games events that happens worldwide. It's where Xbox and PlayStation, everybody else unveils those brand new shiny consoles. And IGF is the Independent Games Festival. It runs kind of inside of inside GDC, kind of right before it. And they integrated the Alt Control Award in 2017 as part of the IGF, which is really cool. It becomes associated with alt as an alternative, and that has all the connotations that alternative has always had in indie culture, which is no accident, because originally when I was making it, I was thinking of alt.subgroup inside Usenet settings, and I thought that was really cool. For me, was one of the inspirations for the name. I wanted to call it alt something, and Chris came up with the control part, and that's how that got born. So there is also a parallel alt arcade experience happening on right now, which deserves separate study. And some of what I'm going to say is going to apply to that, and some of it is not. But that is an amazing kind of community, and there's a lot of crossover. So here's some of the lovely flyers. This was the original game jam that ran at NYU Polygame Innovation Lab. And this is the Russian flyer from 2017 I found. I thought it was really great because it had a hack glove controller. A website where you can see games that have come out over the last several years in this kind of category. It's Shake That Button, which I adore. So I've been working for like a rough definition of what I think alt control games are. And I have a few thoughts on this. So while I helped spark a genre, its rapid growth was more than I could have ever hoped for or even thought would happen. And it's produced a whole host of successful games. And what I've noticed by looking at all of these games and looking at how they work, I believe an alt control game is a game where the mechanics are embedded in the controller itself. So that means that like most alt control games cannot be played on a generic controller. The mechanic is actually in the interface. So the game would be very different if you try to play it on a standard joypad, if it was even remotely possible. The mechanic is kind of, you can think of it as the verb in a game, and it involves the controller. So if you think about that, like if the verb is touching, the game's controller is going to pick up and be part of and encourage and have the story of that touch mechanic on the interface itself. So it's impossible to abstract the gameplay away from the controller. They're tightly coupled. The procedural rhetoric is extended into the controller. And what do I mean by procedural rhetoric? I mean the system itself is the message, and it is in the controller. So the game is telling its story through the controller. In art games, like the three in question, and the three in question in this quote from Ian Beghost, I think, are marriage, passage, and I'm going to space on the third one. But a procedural rhetoric does not argue a position, as rather it characterizes an idea. And that's how Ian Beghost defines procedural games. And that's what I think these controllers are doing. They're characterizing ideas on the control space themselves. Okay, so here's a couple of examples of these kinds of games. This is Pain Station, which is, as far as I can tell, the very first one. And all of these games arose out of art schools and the intersection of open source hardware like the Arduino and processing, Director, in some cases C++, the basic stamp controller. These interfaces, which had open source hardware and software, really empowered these kinds of interfaces to come to fruition, because it's the first time people control the software and the hardware. And Pain Station is a really good example of that. The game itself looks like Pong, but when you miss, the game punishes you by using pain as kind of a penalty mechanic. So the controller heats up, and the game actually has nothing to do with Pong and everything to do with who can actually take the most pain in the game. There's even a little wit that comes out and starts slapping you. It's kind of an amazing game. And it's a play on PlayStation and how painful some of those controllers have been to hold. So I kind of love that. Hit Me by Kaho Abe, Rosetta Parsons. It is 2 hack doorbell controllers in these boxes on construction hats. And the goal is to hit the other person on the head first. And then it takes a picture of the person you're hitting. Hold on, let me make sure this makes sense. It takes a picture of the face of the person doing the hitting from the perspective of the person being hit. And then it puts that on the wall. Later editions then tweeted it. And I just thought that was such a wonderful... Hit Me is just this wonderful like social critique around violence. And I love this game. It's also really fun to play. Maddie Bryce is another creator who's made some amazing alt control games. You touch Maddie and play this game alongside Maddie as the interface. So it's very embodied in quite a real physical sense. You're navigating around this little like maze-like world, playing as Maddie. This movement is identifying some very interesting opportunities for user experience design in conjunction with game design. However, what they're not doing is making mass control devices. They're making bespoke, craft, handmade objects that are there as like conversation starters or community engagement within a community of practice. And these games are often situated within art galleries and games conferences. And they're more almost as provocation, as idea starter, as comment, as critique. And I think they're very valuable in terms of what they're offering. They're extremely well received within the games community itself. And I find that really encouraging. So it's a collision with crafting and maker culture, and it's no accident. Chris and I both were really associated. Chris is now a core member of NYC Resistor in New York City. And he and I both were like hacking and making nonstop. And we were not alone because we were making games and hacking controllers, but apparently by the success of this community nearly instantly growing out from like a weird game jam to like a global phenomenon, we were not alone. So designers need a better tool to make game interactions with, right? They need to have better ways to make expressive player customization, right? They need to really think about how to make games more flipping awesome. Because standard controllers now look and feel pretty boring. What if users could completely define their own interfaces based on their abilities? Dun, 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 dun. And this is what the tool that Rebecca and I have been working on called InteractML does. So InteractML is this really cool node-based interface inside Unity. And I am now going to just show you a YouTube video explaining it because I think it makes more sense. So I made it node-based because I really wanted to make it accessible to the largest number of people, and I didn't want to have to make you program machine learning algorithms to be able to train and use InteractML in a running, playing game. So hold on, now I'm going to show you a lovely YouTube video. Let's see how this goes. Bum, bum, bum. Okay. Oh no, oh no, oh no. Okay, let's see. Aha, I have it. All right. Oh dear. Please excuse me. I am trying to switch the video here in PowerPoint. All right, great, here we go.
InteractML is a node-based visual scripting tool for designing movement interaction in Unity. Perform your movement interactions to train InteractML's machine learning system. Then instantly use your movement designs to trigger events in your environment. A tool specifically designed for artists, dance practitioners, as well as game developers. The process is quick and easy, minimal programming experience required. Use any movement input, including virtual reality controllers, hand tracking with the Leap Motion controller, face tracking with AR Foundation, body tracking with the Kinect or motion capture system, or any movement sensor in Unity. For more information on our upcoming opportunities, including artist residencies, workshops, game jams, and hackathons, join our mailing list at interactml.com.
Great. And I hope from that you realize that InteractML is a large group of people now at this point, not just me. It involves a whole host of other researchers, which is always what someone working on software wants. They want their tool to grow into a community, which it now has. And it's bigger than me and Rebecca now. It involves so many wonderful and amazing people that you can read about on the InteractML. Shout out to Clarice, who was in that video and made it. She's been doing most of the heavy lifting design. Cool. Awesome. So moving along, I'm going to now talk about my game Bot Party and just show you some of my own work that I've made. Bot Party is a game that I really wanted to make to explore intimacy and holding hands with strangers in public. And as much as it has been a provocation for others, it has really changed my life, and the experience of touching 3,000 strangers in 1 year will shift how you experience reality. That would be the way I'd put it. So a little bit about Bot Party. It started off as a analog synthesizer and step sequencer that multiple people could play, and I call this one Baby Bot, and it evolved to this.
Scared to bots.
And it's evolved even beyond this now, but this is video explains the mechanic really well, which is the touch mechanic.
Yeah, if you try and press buttons, you'll hear it'll cue you to interact. So try and press a button.
Let's connect.
And then if you two connect, you'll get a sound. So then I think this one is,
Scared to bots.
and then that one I think is, this is touch me. So then if you come in, you'll get a third sound. So that's how it works.
So it's the basics of Bot Party. It evolved to be have multiple modes. One of them where you have to touch certain people at certain times, and it gets faster and faster. It gets really manic. The controllers evolved to be see-through. Now they have vibration in them, which is some feedback I got from a blind player, and they're really lovely. This is kind of what they look like now. Cool. So you can play it in huge groups of people, like huge, massive groups of people can play it. So I think I have a video of that here. So that's kind of what it looks like when big groups of people play it. Here it was at Res, which is a game conference that happens here in London, and you'll see that groups of 3 to 5 generally play it, and they get very excited when they work out how it works. So that's Bot Party. This is a project I made at CCI with the MSc students last year, exactly this time last year, called Forest Daydream. I made it in conjunction with a whole bunch of other artists, Robin Baumgard, who made Line Wobbler, Fede Fauché, Matt Jarvis, and of course the remarkable and amazing Ben Kelly, who did the sound in conjunction with the Wampi indigenous folks in the Amazon, recording the sounds from their natural environment. And this video game world brought into physical space really is a provocation to think about the collision of virtual and physical spaces, and in so many ways kind of foretold, I feel like, what was coming with our lives in the COVID world, where our physical world would be taken away and we were left with just a virtual representation of it. And the sounds are from this community in the rainforest, and they really give you a sense of an environment and a place. And this game is just really a delight to play. It's got different experiences in it, different mini games that when you unlock, you can change the lighting, you change the sound. I put in a lot of objects. I think it's really important to have objects that are non-digital environments. I put in some of these cushions to really encourage people to play on the floor, and that definitely happened. There was a whole bunch of bouncing and playing on the floor. I don't think I included a video for Thrum, which is unfortunate. But my next work is to really clarify what I mean when I'm talking about bespoke controllers and craft. I think that a lot of these interfaces are specifically crafted, and I don't think that I ever want them mass-produced. I want them to remain part of my artistic practice, and I want them to remain part of the dialogue of craft. And I really feel this kind of approaching interface design from the perspective of a kind of intersectional feminist perspective, where someone who's been working with disability is attempting to make games for a community they're helping to create as a experience to play with others. I really believe that falls within feminist practice, and I want to clarify that research a bit more in my PhD. And I really think it's time for a universal design critique. I'm really upset that it took Microsoft, I remember counting, I think it was 17 years from the original bringing out of the Xbox, either 14 or 17, the Xbox controller, to launch an accessibility controller. And this is really something that it burns me up inside when people bring out assistive technologies and then they charge more for them, which is what Xbox did. And you can't just buy a version of the Xbox with the assistive controller. No, you get to pay an extra $100 because capitalism. Might as well make money off people who have disabilities, right? Because they're loaded. Lots of feels there. So anyway, that is my work, and that is kind of what I'm thinking about, where my head is out, and I hope you took my lovely thoughts that are my PhD research, and it wasn't too painful, and it was clear. And if you have any questions, please let me know, and I will absolutely answer them. Twitter at Phoenix Perry. I'm also phoenix.perry at arts.ac.uk. And that's it. Thanks for coming. Thanks for listening. And I really appreciate your time. Bye.